It's been a little bit over a year since one of the worst trades in the history of the NBA. Rudy Gobert going to the Minnesota Timberwolves in exchange for all kinds of stuff, way too much stuff. However, my opinion on this trade is actually kind of changing as we head into this upcoming season. Now, my opinion on the trade at the time, you can go back and look at these videos. That's one of the nice things about making videos like this is I have the receipts. I can point to it. Sometimes it doesn't work out so well, but in this particular instance, I'm pretty proud of this take and I like actually having this one out there. I hated the trade. I thought it was way too much in exchange for Rudy Gobert. I understood what Minnesota was trying to do. They were trying to add a piece alongside Anthony Edwards, alongside Karl-Anthony Towns. They recognized an opportunity to put themselves near the top of the conference. It's something they've done in the past with the Jimmy Butler trade. It's something that they have tried to do a few different times throughout the history of their franchise. They thought that this was the move. They brought in new people into the front office. They decided, let's go for this thing right away. The problem that I had was the compensation and the player that they picked in terms of how he fits on the roster and how it could potentially impact someone like Anthony Edwards. However, now that it is becoming very, very clear that Anthony Edwards is on a top 10 player of the league kind of trajectory within his career as one of the better perimeter players in the entire league and still so young, someone that's still growing and continuing to improve, in addition to some of the emergence of some of these other guys on this roster like McDaniels and how well they actually played against Denver in the postseason last year and how limited they were in terms of the amount of games that they had their full team and roster together and healthy. With all of those different factors combined, I'm starting to see a vision here where maybe the Rudy Gobert trade actually works out. And by works out, I mean maybe they could compete to be a top 4 team in the West this year. When you look at their record from last year, it's actually pretty impressive considering how few games they actually had their full team together, whether that be Karl-Anthony Towns during the regular season or whether that be McDaniels in the postseason because for whatever reason he decided to punch a wall, which we just won't talk about for the rest of the video. But there is a real possibility that maybe this was actually the correct move. Now, the assets that they traded in exchange were still 10 times more what any other team in the league was willing to trade. At the time, I honestly thought that Rudy Gobert was more of a contract dump kind of asset, salary dump kind of asset than he was like a real let's get stuff in exchange for him player. And Utah ended up with way more than I ever thought that they would. So let's just put the compensation to the side for a second. Let's just talk about Minnesota making the trade, bringing in Rudy Gobert and adding him to a group that includes Anthony Edwards, McDaniels, and Karl-Anthony Towns. In that kind of construction, we saw last year when all those guys played together that you can probably make it work because of Towns' ability to space the floor, because of how good he is offensively, because Gobert is still very, very good defensively despite slipping a little bit in that category over the last couple of seasons as he's gotten older, which makes total sense. And most importantly, the rise of Anthony Edwards as an incredible potential top 10 player in the entire league over the next couple of seasons. All those factors together, in addition to obviously the emergence of some other players on the roster, it does kind of make sense, right? However, this is the part that I'm changing my mind on. Before, at the time of the Gobert trade, I thought, during the regular season, maybe it'd be fine, but in the postseason, there's just no way that this works out. There's no way that they're actually going to be championship contenders. This is a terrible trade. It's just not going to work. The thing that I'm changing on a little bit here, and it has everything to do with Anthony Edwards and how good I think he can be, is I do think Minnesota could be a top 4 team. They could potentially push to make the Western Conference Finals, maybe even the finals with this roster, with one big adjustment, and that is Karl-Anthony Towns. I've seen enough of Karl-Anthony Towns in the postseason and in big games to know that I probably just don't want the guy on my team. And there obviously is something to do here with his fit alongside Rudy Gobert, which we're going to talk about. But if I'm in a playoff series and I'm picking bigs, I'm picking front court players around the league that everybody else sees as stars, Karl-Anthony Towns is pretty far down on that list for me in terms of someone that I would actually pick in one of my team. The decision making just isn't there. He's not nearly as efficient. Right now, at this point in his career, I know he's only 27 years old. I don't think he's built for playoff basketball. I just don't. So if they were able to find a trade out there, whether that be Damian Lillard, whether that be Zach LaVine, I don't know, whoever the guy would be, another wing, a front court player that fits better alongside Rudy Gobert, if they were able to get Karl-Anthony Towns level value in exchange for Cat and spread that throughout the roster, make the focal point, McDaniels is our defensive stopper wing and improving offensive player, Rudy Gobert does Rudy Gobert things as he has done throughout his entire career, and Anthony Edwards is one of the best guards in the entire league. With that framework, in addition to Karl-Anthony Towns level assets on this roster, I think they can be a top 4 team. I think they can be a Western Conference Finals team. I think they could maybe even push for a finals appearance with this version of Minnesota's roster. That's not something that I thought I would have said at the time of the Gobert trade last year. But with this version of the roster, I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible for them to put Cat and Gobert together and make it all work. I think the fact that they were able to place, I would say so well, but the fact that they were able to still put together a decent record without Cat for most of last season just continues to prove to me that Gobert, alongside another semi-traditional big, obviously Cat's one of the best shooting big men in the league, but he is technically still a 5. His best position is still 5. Gobert alongside that kind of player, it's just not going to work, and it mitigates a lot of the really good things that Gobert can do. And at this point, you're not going to get value in exchange exchange for Gobert. So you might as well trade Cat and really try and push for this and go for this because you've already made the Gobert trade. I wouldn't be advocating to trade Cat if they didn't make the Gobert trade. I would be advocating them to just keep it together, continue to grow and develop. But at this point, you might as well change something up because you've already committed. You can't take it back. You can't say, oh, well, you know what? The Rudy Gobert thing didn't work out. Let's just try something different. You can't take it back. You just can't. So now maybe trade Karl-Anthony Towns and see what that version of the roster looks like. Now, to be clear, I'm not changing my opinion of the initial trade whatsoever. If Minnesota could just snap their fingers and reverse the Gobert trade right now, they would do it 100 out of 100 times. It was a mistake. They know it was a mistake. They know they gave up too much in exchange. They know that they should not have bet on someone that was getting older on a big contract to fit alongside Karl-Anthony Towns, something they should not have done. And in many ways, they ruined the momentum that their franchise had built in the prior season with the way that they were able to put together that roster. And I want to make it clear that I, as a huge critic of the trade in the first place, I'm not changing my mind on that, but I am changing my mind on what this roster, what this team could accomplish with one big adjustment. Because at the time of the trade, I thought it was impossible that they would ever be championship contenders with Gobert on the roster. I think if they trade away Karl-Anthony Towns, I think they could be. That's the piece that's changing for me. And for Utah, to me, it remains incredible that they got as much in exchange for Rudy Gobert as they did. At the time, it felt like they got more in exchange for Gobert with his massive contract, playing in a non-premium position and getting older, than they did in exchange for Donovan Mitchell, who was one of the best young guards in the entire league. Now, things have evened out a little bit because all of a sudden Lauri Markkanen is like a borderline all-NBA caliber player in Utah, so obviously that changes the equation. But the fact that at the time they were able to get that much in exchange for Gobert remains a mystery. It remains a mystery to me who Minnesota was bidding against, who was going to trade even something remotely close to that in exchange for Gobert, all the draft picks, all that stuff. And now Utah is set up so incredibly well, not only because they got all that stuff, but they also got someone like Walker Kessler in exchange, who is semi-replaced a lot of what Gobert provided Utah in the first place. And they're in a fantastic position in terms of, like, if they really wanted to, they could win 45 games this year. I think they could have done that last year. They decided to kind of shut things down towards the end of the season, try and get a better draft pick. They've continued to add more interesting young players to the roster. They have a lot of opportunity to continue to add to this group as well. And it is one of the best, two trade sequences that we've seen in one offseason. And it's something that most teams wouldn't have done. Utah was still a good team. There was a clear ceiling on their team that they weren't going to be a top tier team, but they were very, very good. And not many GMs, not many front offices would have decided to go ahead and tear all that down, but they did. And when you look at what that Utah team was before they traded Mitchell and Gobert, that version of that team, a team that at one point had one of the best records in the entire Western Conference and at times looked like a championship contender. If you take that version of that team, which was essentially Mitchell, some other guard stuff sprinkled in, and Gobert, if you take that version and then you add whatever you get in exchange for Karl-Anthony Towns, and in addition to McDaniels on the roster, that is what Minnesota could now be if they trade Karl-Anthony Towns. And that's the blueprint that I have in my mind, is what Utah was with Mitchell and Gobert, plus all the other assets that Minnesota does still have, whether it be McDaniels or Cat. And I honestly cannot wait to see what this roster looks like this year, because if they don't play particularly well in the beginning of the year, I think a Cat trade could 100% be a possibility for Minnesota.